Appreciate you taking this time to join us today. Our purpose of our meeting, we have two teachers and what I would call two experts on behavior, is our purpose is to help the viewers understand how we're trying to improve our mission. Our mission at Jefferson County High School is to prepare responsible, productive citizens. And Tammy, you're a teacher, and Tony, you're a teacher. Can I start with asking you something that you and I have talked about of your frustration? You brought a newspaper to explain a little bit, so can you share that with us?
Sure. In January of 2010, I opened up our local newspaper, and as I was just scanning through, I started noticing that a lot of the students that I have had in the past were in the newspaper, in the crime section. And as I started reading through them, I think there's probably a total of 12 to 14 things ranging from theft to drugs to child rape charges. I really started trying to think, why do these students behave well in my class but aren't doing well as a citizen in the community? And I began to start to analyze, you know, I'm so focused on the academics I have to teach, I'm not thinking about helping them be responsible citizens.
Right.
I'm just asking them to be compliant in my own classroom. So I think that began to change my philosophy on teaching.
Well, what we'd like to do, Jeanette and Dr. Bill Blevins, we appreciate you joining us. Do you have some questions for Tammy here that might be helpful of us understanding what's been going on?
What have you changed in your classroom?
I think as my philosophy has evolved, my relationship with my students has gotten a lot stronger. Feeling the pressure of evaluation and teacher evaluations, that's still important, but something that's more important is the relationships that I have with my students. In working with Bruce this past year, beginning to understand choice theory better, because I did not have a tool to help me help them. So this has helped me relate to them in a better way. Even though I have a relationship with them, I'm able to help coach them into making better decisions.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say something that jumped out to me when you were talking about that, about seeing about your students, and you said that you have been paying more attention to teaching the content and not on helping them to become responsible citizens. And what it triggered in my mind is that I remember when I was growing up, they said that the three basics in education is reading, writing, and arithmetic. And there's another R that could be added to that, and that's responsibility. And another R that would be relationships. That the responsibility and the relationships perhaps are even more important than the content. Because if they can get the content but they can't do anything with it, if they haven't learned how to relate and how to be responsible. And I think that's where one of the values of choice theory training comes in.
Sure. And we're really calling this responsibility skills. And I want to thank Bill and Jeanette for being here today. Their normal fee is about $1,000 so per day, and they've given us a 99% discount today. So I appreciate y'all being willing to offer. And why don't, before Tony shares what he's going to share, what he's been doing the last few years, could y'all briefly share some of your all's experiences over the last quite a few years?
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Jeanette.
Go ahead.
You ladies first.
Okay.
Well, I've been with the William Glasser Institute for about 32 years. And I have worked in many schools that use these concepts that have gone from the lowest in the district in grades and in changing children's behavior
Test scores also.
and test scores, and it was all based on relationships and getting to know the students and asking them to self-evaluate and continuous improvement, everything can be improved. And so by self-evaluating, they're asking themselves, is what I'm about to do or say going to bring me closer to what I want or farther away?
Okay, Bill?
Well, my academic career has involved two basic areas. One in religion, teaching in the religion department at Carson Newman for about 26 years. And during that time, and early in that time, I went back to UT because my primary interest was in helping people to change their lives in a practical and healthy way. So I went back to UT and got training in doing counseling psychology. Over the years, and keeping my getting my CEUs for my license, I started getting training in neuroscience and being absolutely enamored by what we're learning about the brain and how it works and how it relates to our behavior and how our behavior relates to how the brain functions. But the point is that in both of these areas, in both religion and in counseling, doing psychotherapy with people, it all involves relationships and it all involves behavior. So I come at it from that angle. Primarily right now my focus is on what we're learning about the brain, how that affects our relationships. And I think that also underlies a great deal of what choice theory is about. When I started my graduate work in the mid-70s at UT, the primary focus was on Freud. And the only person that I read in those days who was just coming on the scene was William Glasser, and I thought this makes a great deal of sense to me. It's dealing with everyday life and behavior. And so the whole idea of choice theory has been in the back of my mind. I'm not an expert in it like you all are, but I do see the value in that, and it goes right along with the behavior, the relationships, and the neuroscience. It all fits very perfectly together.
Can you share a little bit, Tony, what you attempt to do? You've been working on these ideas for over 15 years now, and I know you started out as a pretty frustrated teacher. And what do you think about when you enter the classroom?
Okay. Well, Bruce mentioned the school's mission statement. The county's mission statement is success and productivity for every student. Okay? 6 simple words. The challenging word in those 6 words is every. Okay? How is it possible for a teacher in the classroom to get everyone to be successful and productive? Okay? How do you get that senior boy who doesn't have near enough credits to graduate to still put forth some effort in your class to try to pass your class's proficiency test, which is 50% of your evaluation score? Okay? One thing that I do is, when students come to me, is I understand what really motivates their behavior. And behavior is motivated by people trying to meet 5 basic needs. And I teach these needs to my students. And they use their fingers to remember them. The first need is survival. So as a teacher, making out your lesson plan are the things you can put in your lesson plan to help students meet the need for survival. For example, instead of having students sit in a chair for 90 minutes, you include activities which gets them up moving around a little bit, which actually increases the blood flow to the brain. And this work done by Eric Jensen, this is when you stand, the blood flow to your brain actually increases by 15%. The second one is belonging. And belonging is using this finger. When you have a friend, you want to tell them a secret, what do you do? Come here, I want to tell you a secret. Okay? This is belonging. So you provide students opportunities in the room to get to know each other. I spend the first week doing a lot of belonging activities in my classroom. So they all feel like people know something about them and they appreciate them, and that's a real strong motivator. The third need is the need for power. That's by the tallest finger right here, called the power finger. And with power, you do things with kids to help them be recognized in class. One thing I try to do is maybe have circle seating, where they can all see each other, they make comments, they're all, they're all acknowledged, and, you know, give them some put-ups, not put-downs, put-ups. The fourth need is the need for freedom, because, and this is represented by this finger right here, your wedding ring finger, because when you get married, you choose to give up a little bit of freedom.
A little bit.
A little bit, in my case, a lot. Anyway, so you allow them maybe some choices in the class. And the last one is this little finger right here, and that's need for fun. Try to provide something in your lesson that allows kids to have a little bit of fun. Smile a little bit, maybe laugh a little bit. Okay? So if kids perceive your class as being a need-satisfying environment, then they'll be more motivated to do what you ask them to do. Even they know that it's not going to get them a chance to get that diploma, they just want to be in there and be a part of that atmosphere.
I'd like to ask you, what happens when children are afraid, like test scores? What happens to the brain when a student is afraid? Where does the brain power go?
Yeah, you know, Deming, the guy who brought the quality movement to Japan, helped rebuild their economy when it got blown to smithereens by America. You know, Deming says you can't have quality in a fearful environment. And so what I tell my students is that you're all going to pass proficiency. Don't worry about that, okay? As long as you kind of come to class and do what I ask you to do, I've had great success helping you do that. So don't be fearful of that. I'm here to help you. We're here to help each other achieve that.
So when you're afraid, your brain power goes to your muscles to fight or flee.
That's right.
And so before you're testing them, the best thing to do is set what kind of environment, a fun environment where they're relaxed and they have that brain power to do better.
And yeah, I would agree with that. And also, carrying that a little bit further, when people are afraid or they're angry, any of these negative type emotions is controlled by an area in the brain. I won't get into the technical names of them here, but it's controlled by an area of the brain, and when it takes control, it causes the prefrontal, the conscious part, which works by reason and logic, to shut down. And this is called an amygdala hijacking. When a person is taken over by these strong emotions, and we've all had the experience of saying, you know, after we've done something foolish or whatever, we say, why did I say that? Why did I do that? Because this part of the brain that controls the emotions does not work by logic or by reason. And it sometimes has control over the rational part of the brain. There is an area of the brain that's a bridge between the lower brain and the higher brain, which is the anterior cingulate, which can moderate this and give our reason, our logic, control over the emotions. We can't always control the emotions because they sometimes take over and reason goes out the window. But there are certain behaviors that we can do that strengthens that anterior cingulate. And when it is strengthened, people can act in a much more compassionate way, and a much more insightful way, and a much more cooperative way, a much healthier way of living. And the needs that you mentioned when you held up your fingers are all behaviors and needs that strengthen that part of the brain that helps us to control fear and use fear in a constructive way rather than letting it interfere with our accomplishments. And that basically goes back to environment and what you're doing in the classroom of creating a bonding with the students.
Do you see, Bill, how creating that environment helps overcome our brain's negativity? Would you share with us what you've learned about the brain and how it was created sort of on this negative side? Would you mention that?
Well, this goes back to the early part of last century. Paul MacLean described us as having three brains that developed at three different times. The lower part of the brain, the reptilian brain, we share that with all reptiles, is in control of all of the necessary things for survival. And it controls those. And then they were developed on top of that the limbic system, which controls the emotions. And both of these two are called the old brain, or Dan Siegel now calls them the downstairs brain. But this part of the brain is unconscious, and it does not work by reason or logic. It cannot tell the difference between an image and reality. This is why your dreams seem real. We get these images in our mind, and that part of the brain can't tell the difference. And then on top of that, what makes us distinctively human is the prefrontal cortex, which is the last part of the brain to develop, and that's the part that has the creativity, the insight, the reason, the logic, and all of that makes us distinctively human. And is also, that's where it's related to our mind. But the interesting thing here is that we are not just individuals in and of ourselves. We are connected to one another. And our interactions with one another trigger how the brain functions and the brain chemistry. And that controls our moods. The brain controls everything we experience. There is nothing that we can experience that doesn't go through the brain in one way or another. And what we do in our behavior affects the brain, and the brain affects the behavior because we're whole people. I'm going on, I'm too long here. One last phrase is that our mind, our brain, is not only all over our bodies, embodied in us, but it's embedded in our culture. And everything that goes on in our culture affects how we think, how our brain gets wiring. But we can always rewire the brain in different ways. So a person that comes from a home where there has been neglect, they have not gotten their emotional needs met, their brain is wired to live in that kind of world. They don't know very well how to relate to other people, etc. The brain changes as long as we live. We can always grow new brain cells, new neurons. We can rewire it. And the choice theory helps kids to rewire their brains so that they can behave in a much healthier way and to relate to one another. How we interrelate, and this goes back to the classroom that you were talking about, the activity is getting to know each other. Those interactions are changing the brains of these kids. It's also changing our brains as teachers as we interact with people. And that impacts their whole life. And that's where we get into the every person. Because they don't all come with the same abilities. They don't all come, they've been raised in different environments. But here we can have a positive impact through these kinds of behaviors, such as are taught in choice theory.
I want to ask Tony, what's the first thing you're going to do with your group of students in Tammy that will help the environment to be a safe, caring, friendly environment? Are you going to talk about rules of the room, or are you going to, what are you going to do?
Well, several activities. You mentioned about the fear. I was going to have students give everybody a post-it note and have the right fear they have about being in the freshman academy this year, and then also something they're excited about on a post-it note, and put those up on the board. And as part of their homework assignment for the night, we'll give them all a little index card and have them to write down, okay, now take a fear up there, and what can you do to help either yourself or someone else overcome that fear? So we'll do that. And then I also want to have all of them begin working on a nameplate for their desk. And on that nameplate will have their name done in a kind of creative way. And then around that name will be things that kind of tie into the needs, something to do for fun, someone that's important in their life, something they're proud of, and to put those on the name tags and have students to interview each other about the name tags, and then in a circle to share, introduce their person to the class within the circle.
Well, I'm gonna observe Tony's class during my planning period and then implement. No, typically in the past, coming from a traditional perspective, it has been, these are the rules, this is the way we're going to do things. You can be over here, but not over here. So it's really, that establishment, which, everybody the first day is bombarded with rules. Rules for new freshman academy, and it's brand new. I think in working with Bruce this past year, I really like kind of chunking out the rules and the academics at the first and just getting the environment established. I think that's one thing that, as we prepare teachers, we don't talk about the environment very much. And so it's just over time that has become important to me. It's in my tone, it's in how I present myself, not just what is in the room. It's me being an important component of that. And then really trying to pick up some good strategies as far as activities to implement that first week.
You have some very challenging students, as you can see. Our normal approach has been, if a student's not cooperating, we basically, the governor would support this, is we're supposed to punish them or figure out a way to hurt them. Do you see these ideas helping to help them be more responsible and helping to learn a new skill?
Well, of course not.
Right.
I think as, again, traditionally speaking, that's our mentality. If someone breaks a rule,